before that, I want your calls on this. Does Britain need conscription to bolster the army and prepare for war? Now, that's what former military chiefs are calling for. They predict that the UK will be involved in a war by, terrifyingly, 2030, and that the army will need to use conscription because they can't rely solely on drones and technology. Would you be happy if this happened? Do you think perhaps it needs to happen? Do give us a call, 0207 862 2222. Labour MP Paulette Hamilton was on Matt's panel earlier. She is in favour of this. Let's hear what she had to say.
I do think we need to start the serious discussions around conscription, because young people have not engaged, but they're going to have to, because our borders are being threatened and you cannot continue to bury your head in the sand. My parents and grandparents' generation fought for this country and enabled us to have 70-odd years where we have had relative peace and harmony. It is being threatened at the moment. So the younger generation cannot continue to say we're not going to engage.
Jovan, as a member of the younger generation, how do you feel about those comments?
I feel quite conflicted because I completely understand where Paulette's coming from. My fundamental question is, what would we be fighting for, people of my age, when around us we've seen the decline in basically everything? I think it would be really hard to muster a whole range of people to say go out and fight when there doesn't seem to be a lot to defend. Can't get a house, the job market's really difficult, wages are low, there's a cost of living crisis. I think it's really hard to sell that argument that you're fighting for something when within that period of relative stability, there has been a significant decline for our age.
Cristo, how do you react to that?
Well, I think life was wonderful in 1939 for everyone, wasn't it? I mean, if that was the attitude taken, and I'm not, by the way, in favour of this immediate idea of conscription, but I think that had that attitude of, well, I don't think the country's done an awful lot for me, being prevalent in 1939 when times were really tough for people, I think we would be up the proverbial creek at the moment. So, yeah, I agree with you about the conscription. I think we disagree a bit on the reasons.
All right. Well, don't go anywhere because we're taking your calls on this right after the break. Should Britain bring back conscription to bolster the army? And don't forget, later we'll also want your thoughts on whether the NHS should pay patients to attend comedy shows in order to help their mental health. 0207 862 2222 is the number. We'll see you right after this. But now we're talking about bringing back conscription to Britain. Do you think we need it? Would you fight for our country? Do give us a call. 0207 862 2222 is the number. Let's now speak to former British Army officer Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Hamish, do you think conscription is absolutely necessary?
Well, I think at the moment, no, it's not. I mean, it's an absolute last resort. However, if it looks as though President Trump is going to throw us under a Russian bus, we might have to consider the option that once again, Britain is going to have to fight a tyrant coming west. And if that is the case, then we will have to consider how to get people, sufficient numbers into our Army, Navy and Air Force to do that. But at this very moment in time, although our forces are much denuded and we've taken a hell of a lot of risk with them since the end of the Cold War, the thought of recruiting tens of thousands of young people into the Army now, I think is sort of clickbait and slightly irrelevant. I mean, I've been a soldier and a reservist for the last 37 years, and I've fought in virtually every battle in that time. So I know how dreadful it is and how you want to avoid it. And actually, we've got 100,000 or so reservists who should be the first people to be called up to bolster any force. So, yeah, conscription might be possible. And I heard the end of your other guests talking about the First and Second World War, when, of course, we had to have conscription. Unfortunately, you know, in Putin, we have the modern-day Adolf Hitler, who is trying to subjugate Ukraine and probably Europe. So we have to consider it. And the final bit on this, Storm, it's all about showing a conventional deterrence. And when Putin looked west on the 24th of February 2022, almost 3 years ago, he didn't see a conventional deterrence because we'd let it drop. He respects strength and exploits weakness. And at the moment, that's what we're showing. So in the worst case, conscription certainly will have to consider it, but we've got a long way to go before we have to get young men and women into the army in droves, as it were.
When you talk about conventional strength, what I'm thinking and considering, if there was conscription, that's all very well and good, forcing young men and women into the armed forces in order to bolster those numbers. But with numbers means you're going to have the uniform, the boots, you're going to have the drones, the planes, the ships, all the infrastructure needed around that increase in numbers. And does the army actually at this moment in time have that kind of capacity to take on bigger numbers of soldiers?
Well, no, it certainly doesn't. And, I'm sure every regular soldier, if you had asked them, would actually prefer to be bolstered with reservists and others and provide a comprehensive fighting force. So I think the conscription bit, as I said, it's a bit of clickbait, and it's a bit for the future. If we're in all-out war where the country is completely involved in a conflict with, say, Russia, which is the most likely, then of course we'll just have to make that happen. But we're a long way from that. At the moment, we need to provide a conventional peace enforcement force, which looks likely, with potentially British troops being deployed to Ukraine to prevent any further fighting. But that is not turning every young man and woman in this country into a soldier. And the infrastructure required to do that is huge, which is why I'm saying is, in the worst case, conscription. But we've got tens of thousands of reservists who might be old like me, but we're all well trained and well motivated, and with the right kit can do the stuff. So I think it's a conflated issue here, and I'm sure none of you are old enough to remember Yes, Prime Minister, when this question was debated, and it's really getting the question right in the first place. So conscription is at the far end in the worst case. There's a lot to go before that. The key thing is that we show a strong conventional defence to try and deter Putin from coming any further west.
Okay, Hamish, I mean, it's interesting that you say that it's clickbait. I suppose people are worried because, yes, we have reservists that are well trained, but after those reservists, we don't have anybody else that's trained. So is military service something that comes up? I mean, I think this is a worrying time, especially when you've got people like yourselves, not yourself particularly, saying that we could be at war within 5 years. How likely do you think that is?
Well, if we show a strong conventional defence now, I think it is less likely. We're in a very complex time. Obviously, we've got a new government in the US, and Trump and his crew are saying some pretty inflammatory things at the moment. But it's about preparation. And certainly, if we are at war in 4 or 5 years' time, then there would be time to train up the young to do it. But again, one doesn't want to overly terrify people, and I agree with you. Everybody's talking about this conscription issue, and lots of young people are getting terribly concerned about it. But the key thing is to make sure that it doesn't happen, and the way that we make sure it doesn't happen is being really strong. And unfortunately, at the moment, it appears that President Trump is more interested in doing contractual deals about minerals than actually trying to prevent a war in Europe. And we can't guarantee that the US this time will come charging over the Atlantic to help us if war does break out. So it's all about prevention, and being strong at this time is the best way to make sure to prevent war. Because as I said at the beginning, I've been fighting wars for the last 37 years, and they're absolutely dreadful, and you've got to avoid them at all costs. And we're in the avoidance place at the moment, and that's what hopefully the Prime Minister and other leaders in Europe will focus on, trying to prevent war rather than trying to create it.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, thank you very much for your time. We're going to take some calls now.
Pleasure.
Mike from Derby, what's your view when it comes to conscription? Is this something that we need, or is this an absolute last resort?
Personally, I think it's a last resort. Good morning to you all, by the way. I've done 25 years in the army myself, and it was a few years ago, because I'm 75 now, obviously, I'm out. But the army itself, I mean, it's an absolutely brilliant way of life. It really is. You're looked after to the hilt. And, okay, if you have to go to war, you go to war. It's part and parcel of all your training and everything. But for young people now who are at school leaving age and what have you, it is seriously worth considering joining up. It really is. It's a fantastic time.
Why are they having such a recruitment crisis if that's the case?
I don't know. You know, it really amazes me a little bit because, like I say, I've done 25 years. I started off at the bottom rank and I ended up as a senior NCO. And I had the most fantastic times going. Now, I've done 9 tours in Northern Ireland in that. I was out doing the border in China and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And it didn't put me off. You know, and I think that's probably the thing that worries people more than anything is the word active service. And
yeah. I wonder whether it's just a generational thing, as Jovan sort of alluded to just before the break. It's, you know, what are they fighting for if they're struggling and they'll never be able to buy a house and they're struggling to get a job that they are trained in and all these sorts of things? Maybe there is also a sort of lack of belief in the country or in the army. I don't know, but there's definitely an issue there, Mike, that we're not getting our finger on. Thank you very much for your call. Terry from Hertfordshire, what's your view?
Hello, Storm. We've spoken before, my dear. I'm 86. I was in the Army doing my national service. And my view is that the Army then was a very different thing than it is now, with all the modern weapons, etc., etc. The argument when they stopped national service was that national servicemen weren't really proper soldiers, etc., etc. But what would you need national servicemen for now? Probably that if you'd taken an occupied place, the people would be there to occupy it for you, defend it, etc., etc. And to answer the young man's question about why should they fight, for the same reason in the Second World War, we didn't want to finish up under the jackboot of Hitler. We don't want to finish up under the jackboot of Putin or even possibly Trump.
Terry, that's a really interesting point. Would that be enough of a compelling issue to get there and fight, is you just don't want to be under Putin's rule?
I think so. I think for a lot of people, we're proud of our country and we would want to contribute, especially in the face of quite awful and unpleasant people around the world. I think it's really important that we do contribute in that way. I think that would be the rallying call that would get a lot of people kind of off their sofas and doing something. But I think in all of it, as I said, there's a kind of bigger story at play. How do you get people, after the army has been cut and been decimated, it doesn't seem like a lucrative or attractive career, you do need to make it encouraging, and it has to be part of our national story. What are we defending and fighting for? As much as these people are absolutely awful and reprehensible, there has to be something to come home to. And if the government's going to offer that for young people, then absolutely, I think more people would get out and join the army.
Right, Terry, thank you for your call. Patricia from Kent, conscription, that's like mandated, so that's forcing people to join the army and fight for the country. Is that ever going to work?
Hello?
Hi there, Patricia.
Oh, good morning, Storm. First of all, congratulations with the baby and good luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Everything goes well.
Me too. And as for conscription, what's your thoughts?
Well, my thought is that if it came to it, no, nobody wants a war. Who does want a war? I was only 5 when the war broke out. I'm 90 now. And I think the first people that should be conscripted is the prisoners in the prisons. Nobody talks about them. Okay. They're talking about all our young men and everything else. But what about the prisoners?
Well, I'll pause you there only because we've already had a couple of years ago when Russia first invaded Ukraine, there was this idea that there was whole forces that were built out of people taken out of jails in Russia and just made to fight in Ukraine. They didn't fight by the rules of war, it's alleged, and it all got very, very messy very quickly. Are criminals the very people you want to trust your country in the hands of, Patricia?
If they're trained in the army, yes, especially the ones that are in and out and in and out.
I mean, I get the logic of your argument, but I'm not sure we should be giving criminals training on guns.
Also, I think the theory behind that is they're just cannon fodder, so they should be the first ones out. And I think the armed forces might find that a bit insulting because they're incredibly highly trained, highly skilled individuals, and you know, that are strict and regimented and work within a team. But thank you very much for your call, Patricia. Brendan from Lancashire, what's your view on this?
Hi, Storm. I'm actually South African. My parents are British. My dad was in the RAF, my grandfather in the Royal Navy. Being brought up in South Africa, conscription was part of the deal. So at school, at the age of 16, you ended up having to sign up, and by the time you finished matric, which 17, 18 years old, you were signed up for 2 years. Me personally, I think people are looking at it from a wrong perspective. Don't look at it as, you know, fair enough, you're fighting for the country, but also, you know, it teaches you things as an individual that you will not learn in everyday life.
This is talking about military service, which is different from conscription. Conscription is you are now in the army and you are fighting for your country. Military service is for 2 years you will learn about the army, you will learn about discipline, you will get up early, you'll clean your boots, you'll do all of that sort of thing. You'll learn regimented tasks. You can also do it in other fields as well as social care.
I think Brendan's got, sorry to interrupt you, but I think Brendan's got a really good point in as much as that if that incentive was there now, i.e. it's made much easier for younger people to get in, that it's perhaps better paid, that perhaps the skills that you learn are better laid out. Maybe the conscription that you're talking about wouldn't be necessary in a few years' time.
But I think that would be the argument for military service and not conscription. So we don't need to think about conscription right now. And as Brendan said, we could just talk about military service.
Yeah, and I think that's something that should be considered implementing. I think it builds a sense of community. You get a sense of kind of national pride. You have an understanding as to what you could be going into. That is a really important value system that we should be creating. But this is about conscripting you with the intention of going to war. And I think those are two very different things. We have to look at them in the round.
I have a really quick point, is that I think we also need to define what is war, as in, is it a direct threat to us here in the UK? Or is it based on politicians having failed and it's a war somewhere else, as we've seen with Iraq, that is actually perhaps something that's not anything to do with us? So I think that needs to be defined too.
Got you. Yes. Yes, you're probably right. Brendan, thank you very much for your call and sharing your story there. Thank you for all your calls on that.